He is the most decorated soldier in the history of the Israeli Defense Forces. But his medals were earned in the shadows, on missions that officially never happened. He was the commander who disguised himself as a woman to hunt assassins in Beirut. He was the leader who stormed a hijacked airliner, saving over 90 lives. For Ehud Barak, duty was absolute. He was the warrior scholar who led from the front, a man willing to pay any price to guarantee his nation's survival. Your support matters. Like, subscribe, and leave one comment. Thank you. Ehud Brog was born in 1942 into a world of conflict and creation. His birthplace, kibbutz Mishmar HaSharon, was a small, determined outpost in the heart of mandatory Palestine. It was a microcosm of the Zionist dream, a collective agricultural settlement built on socialist ideals and sheer willpower. His parents, Yisrael and Esther Brog, were pioneers who had left Eastern Europe behind, trading the Old World's persecutions for the sun-scorched earth and uncertain future of a Jewish homeland. They were nation builders, tilling the soil by day and standing guard by night, instilling in their firstborn son the unshakable belief that their survival depended entirely on their own hands and their commitment to one another. The kibbutz was his first teacher. Life was Spartan, communal, and relentlessly focused on the collective good. Property was shared, meals were taken together in a large dining hall, and children were raised in a dedicated children's house, seeing their parents for only a few hours each day. This system was designed to forge a new type of person, one free from the individualism of the past and wholly devoted to the group. Ehud learned early that his purpose was tied to the fate of his community. He was a son of the kibbutz, and with that came a profound sense of duty. This sense of obligation was sharpened by the constant presence of danger. The kibbutz was an island in a hostile sea, and the need for vigilance was a lesson learned before arithmetic. Every member of the community, including the children, understood the fragility of their existence. This upbringing forged a generation that saw service not as a career, but as the fundamental price of existence. It was a world where the lines between farmer, builder, and soldier were deliberately blurred, creating a society in which everyone was a defender. Yet, within this rigid collective framework, a fiercely independent and brilliant mind was developing. The young Ehud Brog was a paradox. He possessed the physical toughness expected of a kibbutznik, but he also harbored a deep passion for the arts and sciences. He was a gifted classical pianist, and the strains of Chopin and Bach often filled the simple kibbutz dwellings, a stark contrast to the sounds of farm equipment and military drills. Alongside his music, he demonstrated a prodigious talent for mathematics and physics, his mind grappling with abstract concepts far beyond his years. He was a scholar in a land of farmers, an artist in a world demanding warriors. As he approached adulthood, the path forward became clear, dictated by the era in which he lived. For the generation coming of age in the newly independent state of Israel, military service was not a choice but an axiom of life. The War of Independence had secured the nation's birth, but its survival remained precarious. Service in the Israeli Defense Forces was the ultimate expression of the kibbutz ideal of collective responsibility, a sacred obligation to protect the dream his parents had helped build. He later reflected on this formative period, stating, "I was brought up on the idea that the state is the highest value, and that we have to do whatever is needed to protect it." In 1959, at the age of 17, he answered the call. His enlistment was marked by a profound symbolic act that signified his complete immersion into a new Israeli identity. He shed his family's diaspora surname, Brog, and adopted a new Hebrew one, Barak. The name, meaning lightning, was a deliberate choice. It was not merely a convenience, but a declaration of intent, a personal rebirth. He was no longer just the son of pioneers. He was Barak, a flash of power and speed, a force dedicated to the swift and decisive defense of his nation. This transformation was a pledge, binding his destiny to that of Israel itself. From his first day in uniform, Barak's drive set him apart. He did not simply endure the rigors of basic training, he excelled, his physical stamina and mental acuity immediately catching the attention of his commanders. He possessed a rare combination of discipline and initiative, a soldier who could both follow orders and think for himself under pressure. While many of his peers were content to fulfill their mandatory service, Barak sought the most demanding path. He volunteered for the elite paratroopers brigade, a unit revered for its grueling selection process and its role at the forefront of Israel's most critical battles. This choice was a clear statement of his ambition to be among the best. His performance in the paratroopers confirmed the potential his instructors had glimpsed. He was more than just a physically capable soldier. He was a natural leader with a sharp, analytical mind that could dissect a tactical problem as easily as a physics equation. His superiors saw a unique blend of intellect, audacity, and unwavering commitment. The red boots of the paratroopers were a mark of distinction, but for a soldier with Barak's unique blend of intelligence and daring, an even greater, more secretive destiny awaited. The Israeli military was a proving ground, but for a select few there existed a trial by fire unlike any other. This was Sayeret Matkal, an elite special forces unit operating in such deep secrecy that for years its very existence was a state secret. It was a magnet for Israel's brightest and toughest, and Ehud Barak was drawn to its challenge. To be considered, a candidate had to endure the kibbutz, a brutal selection process designed to shatter a man, physically and mentally. Days blurred into a nightmare of forced marches with heavy equipment, sleep deprivation, and relentless navigational exercises across the unforgiving desert. The goal was not just to find the strongest, but to identify those whose minds remained sharp, whose judgment stayed clear, and whose will to lead persisted even when their bodies had failed. It was a crucible that forged soldiers into weapons, stripping away ego and replacing it with unbreakable unit cohesion. Barak, with his unique combination of intellectual rigor and physical stamina, excelled. He was not just surviving the ordeal. He was analyzing it, finding efficiencies in the chaos. He passed, entering a world of shadows where missions were spoken of only in whispers. Sayeret Matkal was the long arm of the Israeli Defense Forces, tasked with strategic reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, and counterterrorism operations far behind enemy lines. Its operators were ghosts, trained to move unseen, strike with precision, and vanish without a trace. Their work provided the critical intelligence upon which Israel's conventional military victories were built. Barak's first major test came as a company commander within the unit during the Six-Day War in 1967. While Israeli jets dominated the skies and tanks thundered across the desert, his small reconnaissance team was operating deep within the Sinai. Their mission was perilous and vital. They moved silently ahead of the main armored columns, mapping Egyptian defensive positions, identifying tank concentrations, and pinpointing artillery batteries. The information they relayed back was not just data. It was the key that unlocked the speed of the Israeli advance. Every piece of intelligence they gathered saved the lives of tank crews and infantrymen, allowing General Israel Tal's armored divisions to bypass strong points and exploit weaknesses with devastating effectiveness. The fighting did not end in 1967. It evolved into the grueling War of Attrition, a conflict of raids and counter-raids across the Suez Canal. Here, Barak further honed his skills in daring, cross-canal operations, striking at Egyptian military infrastructure. His most audacious mission during this period was Operation Rooster 53 in 1969. Israeli intelligence had identified a new, advanced Soviet-made radar station on the Egyptian coast, one that posed a grave threat to the Israeli Air Force. The plan was not to destroy it, but to steal it. Under the cover of darkness, Sayeret Matkal commandos, with Barak as a key officer, were heli-dropped near the site. They swiftly neutralized the Egyptian guards and secured the perimeter. Then came the most incredible part of the mission. Israeli Air Force heavy-lift helicopters swooped in, attached cables to the massive multi-ton radar installation, and airlifted the entire structure out of Egypt. They flew the prize back across the Red Sea to Israel, delivering a technological and intelligence windfall that would be studied for years. The operation was a masterpiece of inter-service coordination, meticulous planning, and sheer audacity. It sent a shockwave through the Egyptian and Soviet high commands, demonstrating that for Sayeret Matkal, nothing was impossible. For Barak, it was another lesson in the power of bold, unconventional thinking. These formative experiences cemented a leadership philosophy that would define his entire career. In the crucible of Sayeret Matkal, there was no room for ambiguity in command. The commander's place was always at the point of greatest risk, leading the charge. This was not a doctrine taught in a classroom. It was an unwritten law, a sacred trust between the leader and his men. Barak embodied this principle completely. His calmness under fire became legendary, a steadying presence for the soldiers who looked to him in the most dangerous moments. He was known for his obsessive attention to detail, spending countless hours poring over maps and intelligence, rehearsing every possible contingency. This meticulous preparation did not make him cautious, it made him bold. It gave him the confidence to take calculated risks that others would deem reckless. He understood that in special operations, hesitation could be fatal, and that success depended on flawless execution, born from perfect planning. His men trusted him implicitly because they knew he had considered every angle, and when the time came for action, he would not be in the rear. He would be at the front. Decades later, he would articulate this core belief with stark simplicity. In our unit, there was no "follow me" in the sense of a commander shouting it, he explained. It was self-evident. The commander is always first, at the head of the force. It was a philosophy of leadership forged in the silent darkness of enemy territory, where survival and victory depended on a leader who was willing to step first into the unknown. Having proven his mettle in the shadows and sands of the Sinai, Barak was about to be entrusted with command of the unit itself. His timing was critical, as a new terrifying wave of international terrorism, aimed directly at Israeli citizens, began to crest across the globe. In 1971, Ehud Barak was given command of Sayeret Matkal. At just 29 years old, he was entrusted with the sharpest edge of Israel's sword. This was not merely a promotion, it was the placement of a nation's security upon the shoulders of one of its most brilliant, yet still young, sons. The responsibility was immense, a weight that could crush a lesser man. Israel was facing a new kind of war, a war fought not on desert battlefields but in airport lounges, on school buses, and at international sporting events. The Palestine Liberation Organization and its splinter factions had declared war on Israeli civilians everywhere, turning the world into their theater of terror. Barak was now the primary instrument to counter this global threat. His unit was the nation's last resort, a precision weapon to be deployed when diplomacy failed, and conventional military options were impossible. The lives of hostages in foreign lands, of citizens at home, and of his own elite soldiers rested on his judgment. He understood that every mission he planned, every order he gave, carried the potential for either spectacular success or catastrophic failure. The strategic landscape was a chaotic chessboard, and Sayeret Matkal was his queen, the most powerful piece, to be moved with absolute care and lethal intent. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a guardian against the encroaching darkness of terrorism. He commanded not like a traditional officer, but like a master strategist, a mathematician solving an intricate equation where human lives were the variables. Barak was the intellectual warrior, a man who saw military problems as complex puzzles demanding elegant, precise solutions. His briefing sessions became legendary within the Israeli Defense Forces. They were not simple overviews, but exhaustive, hours-long intellectual marathons. Every detail was scrutinized, every contingency debated, every possible point of failure identified and countered with a backup plan and a backup for the backup. He would stand before his men, a pointer tracing routes on a map, his mind 10 steps ahead of everyone in the room. He demanded absolute perfection because he knew the stakes. In the world of special operations, a forgotten piece of equipment, a misunderstood hand signal, or a moment of hesitation could lead directly to a coffin draped in a blue and white flag. His meticulous nature was not an academic exercise, it was a shield for his men and for the civilians they were sworn to protect. A fellow soldier later recalled the unique sense of assurance this created. With Ehud, you knew the plan was thought through to the last detail. It gave you the confidence to go into the fire. This confidence was Barak's gift to his soldiers, forged in the crucible of his relentless intellect. But even the most brilliant mind cannot account for the chaos of reality, and command is a burden defined as much by its failures as its successes. In May of 1974, this brutal lesson arrived in the small northern town of Ma'alot. 3 Palestinian terrorists infiltrated from Lebanon and seized a local school, taking more than 100 students and teachers hostage. Barak, then the unit's deputy commander, was deeply involved in planning the rescue. The situation was a nightmare, a building full of terrified children held by fanatics who were prepared to die and to kill. The pressure to act was unbearable. As the deadline for the terrorist status demands neared, the order was given to storm the school. The operation descended into chaos. The assault team was spotted and a ferocious firefight erupted. Before the soldiers could reach them, the terrorists turned their weapons on the children. They unleashed grenades and automatic fire into the crowded classroom. The rescue mission became a recovery. When the smoke cleared, 22 school children and 3 adults were dead, murdered in the final, horrific moments of the standoff. The tragedy was a national trauma, a wound seared into the Israeli consciousness. For Barak and the men of Sayeret Matkal, it was a devastating professional and personal failure. The weight of those lost lives was a heavy cloak. Yet, Barak's response was not one of despair, but of cold, hard analysis. He led a painstaking debriefing, forcing his unit to confront every mistake, every miscalculation, every moment the plan had failed to meet reality. There were no excuses, only lessons. He understood that emotion had no place in the grim calculus of counterterrorism. The burden of Ma'alot was not something to be mourned and forgotten. It was something to be carried, a constant grim reminder of the price of imperfection. The failure had to be dissected, understood, and its lessons integrated into the very DNA of the unit. This brutal education would refine their tactics, hone their instincts, and instill a ruthless focus on speed and precision. The pain of this failure forged a harder, more determined commander. He now knew intimately the cost of chaos and the absolute necessity of control, in the critical moments of an operation. The ghosts of my lot would inform every mission that followed, a silent testament to the thin line between life and death. The lessons learned in the tragic confusion of that schoolhouse would soon be applied with chilling precision when a hijacked passenger plane landed on Israeli soil, initiating a direct confrontation between Barak's unit and armed terrorists. The day was May 8, 1972. Sabena Flight 571, a Boeing 707, was on a routine journey from Vienna to Tel Aviv. But on board, a nightmare was unfolding. 4 terrorists, 2 men and 2 women from the Black September organization, seized control of the aircraft. Armed with pistols and explosives, they forced the pilot to land at Lod Airport, the very heart of the nation they sought to destroy. The hijackers, led by Ali Taha, immediately issued their demands: the release of over 300 convicted terrorists from Israeli prisons. Their threat was absolute and terrifying. If their demands were not met, they would detonate the explosives packed into the plane's fuselage, killing all 90 passengers and 10 crew members. The Israeli government, under Prime Minister Golda Meir, held to its ironclad policy: we do not negotiate with terrorists. A tense and desperate standoff began on the sun-baked tarmac. For 30 agonizing hours, the crisis paralyzed the nation. Inside the airport's control tower, a group of Israel's most senior leaders, including Defense Minister Moshe Dayan and Transportation Minister Shimon Peres, weighed their grim options. A direct assault was deemed suicidal. Any attempt to storm the plane would almost certainly trigger the bombs. They needed a plan that was not just brave, but brilliant. They needed an idea that bordered on the impossible. It came from the 30-year-old commander of the elite Sayeret Matkal Special Forces unit, a young major named Ehud Barak. He presented a concept born of pure audacity and psychological cunning. His plan was not to fight his way onto the plane, but to trick his way on. He proposed a Trojan horse strategy for the modern age. Barak's idea was deceptively simple. He would lead a small team of his best commandos, not in combat gear, but disguised as aircraft technicians. Dressed in white overalls and armed with the tools of their trade, they would approach the hijacked plane under a clever pretext. They would tell the hijackers that the aircraft required essential maintenance before it could be refueled for its demanded flight to Cairo. The goal was to lull the terrorists into a false sense of security, to make them believe their demands were being considered and that the Israelis were cooperating. This was a high-stakes gamble, a plan built entirely on nerve and performance. The slightest mistake, a single suspicious glance from a terrorist peering through a window, would mean instant death for his men and the hostages. The weight of the operation rested squarely on Barak's shoulders, not from a distant command post, but from the front line of deception. He insisted on leading the team himself, dressed in the same white overalls as his men. He would be the first to approach the aircraft, the one to establish the credibility of the ruse. He understood that leadership in Sayeret Matkal meant leading from the front, sharing the same risks as every soldier under his command. His men, including a young and ambitious team leader named Benjamin Netanyahu, trusted him implicitly. They rehearsed their roles meticulously, learning the basics of aircraft maintenance, perfecting the casual, unhurried movements of ground crew, preparing to transform from mechanics into elite warriors in the blink of an eye. On the afternoon of May 9th, the plan was set in motion. The team of 16 commandos walked calmly across the tarmac toward the silent Boeing. The sun was hot, and every eye in Israel seemed fixed on their slow, deliberate procession. They carried toolboxes and equipment, their movements practiced and professional. Barak led them, his face a mask of concentration. They reached the aircraft and began their work. They knelt to inspect the landing gear, tapped on the tires, and ran their hands along the wings, all under the watchful eyes of the hijackers. For 20 agonizing minutes, they played their parts, moving into their pre-assigned positions near the plane's 5 emergency doors and hatches. The tension was an almost physical force, a silent scream hanging in the air. Then Barak gave the signal, a silent, subtle gesture. In a single explosive moment, the illusion shattered. The mechanics became soldiers. They dropped their tools, used specialized equipment to force open the doors, and stormed the aircraft simultaneously from all 5 points. Speed, surprise, and overwhelming force were their only allies. The commandos poured into the narrow fuselage, shouting in Hebrew for the passengers to hit the floor. The cabin erupted into a maelstrom of controlled chaos. The entire assault was a blur of motion and sound, a symphony of precise violence designed to end the crisis in seconds, not minutes. The firefight inside was brutal and terrifyingly brief. The 2 male terrorists were neutralized almost immediately. One of the female hijackers opened fire, wounding a passenger before she was subdued. The other female terrorist had pulled the pin from a grenade in the main passenger cabin, but a commando held her hand, preventing her from releasing the lever until the device could be disarmed. It was over in less than 2 minutes. The commandos had seized control of the plane, securing the hostages and ending the hijacking. Barak himself had a close call, his pistol jamming as he confronted a terrorist, a heart-stopping moment that underscored the razor-thin margin between victory and disaster. The rescue was hailed as a spectacular success. All the hijackers were either killed or captured. Tragically, one passenger, Miriam Anderson, who had been wounded in the crossfire, died later in the hospital. 2 other passengers and 1 commando were wounded, but a catastrophe that could have claimed nearly 100 lives had been averted by Barak's daring plan and his team's flawless execution. The operation, codenamed Isotope, was a masterclass in counterterrorism, a powerful declaration that Israel would not yield to fear. It cemented the legend of Sayeret Matkal and marked Ehud Barak as one of its most brilliant and courageous commanders. The world took notice of Sayeret Matkal's daring rescue, but the fight against Black September was far from over. The ghosts of the Munich Olympics massacre, which would occur just a few months later, demanded vengeance. A new, darker chapter in the secret war against terror was about to begin, and Israel would once again turn to Ehud Barak to deliver its response, this time deep inside the enemy's capital. The shadow of the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre hung heavy over Israel. The world had watched in horror as 11 Israeli athletes and officials were murdered by the Black September terrorist group. For Prime Minister Golda Meir and the Israeli government, grief quickly hardened into a cold, unyielding resolve for retribution. A secret directive was issued, authorizing a campaign of targeted assassinations against the architects of the massacre. This mission, codenamed Operation Wrath of God, would be carried out by the Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency across Europe and the Middle East. But its most audacious and dangerous component was handed to the elite commandos of Sayeret Matkal. Their target was not a single individual in a European city, but the very nerve center of the Palestine Liberation Organization in Beirut, Lebanon. The mission was to infiltrate the heavily fortified heart of the enemy's capital and simultaneously eliminate 3 top PLO leaders in their own homes. The challenge was monumental, bordering on suicidal. Beirut was the PLO's de facto capital, its streets patrolled by thousands of armed fighters who knew every alley and rooftop. A direct military assault was impossible. Infiltrating a team of Israeli soldiers into the city center seemed equally doomed. The planning sessions were intense, with every conventional approach hitting a dead end. It was here that Ehud Barak, the unit's commander, demonstrated the unconventional genius that would define his career. He understood that the greatest weapon they had was deception. The plan he conceived was breathtaking in its audacity. They would not sneak through the shadows. They would walk down the main street in plain sight, hidden behind an ingenious disguise. Barak and several of his officers would dress as women, appearing as couples out for a late-night stroll with their dates, who were other commandos. The preparation was meticulous, a theatrical production for a life-or-death performance. Wigs were selected, makeup was applied, and dresses were chosen to conceal their muscular frames and the weapons they carried. Barak transformed himself into an attractive brunette, his face softened with cosmetics, wearing a stylish dress and carrying a large purse. But this was no ordinary handbag. It was packed with hand grenades, and his hand, seemingly resting gently on his date's arm, was never far from the concealed pistol tucked into his waistband. He practiced walking in heels, modulating his voice and perfecting the mannerisms of a woman. It was a calculated risk of the highest order, a philosophy Barak embraced. That sometimes the most outrageous plan is the safest because it is the one the enemy would never expect. His second-in-command, Muki Betzer, later recalled Barak's leadership during this phase, observing Ehud was cool-headed, an expert in navigation, and a very brave officer. That bravery was about to be tested under the streetlights of an enemy capital. On a dark night in April 1973, the operation, codenamed Spring of Youth, was launched. Israeli Navy missile boats slipped into position off the Lebanese coast. Barak and his teams disembarked into small Zodiac rubber boats, cutting through the waves towards a quiet, pre-selected beach. There they were met by Mossad agents who had been living undercover in Beirut, posing as foreign businessmen and tourists. They had scouted the targets, mapped the routes, and rented cars for the commandos. The drive from the beach into the city was a journey into the lion's den. Every pair of headlights in the rearview mirror, every passing Lebanese army patrol sent a jolt of adrenaline through the silent commandos packed into the vehicles. They were dropped off several blocks from their targets, a trio of high-rise apartment buildings on Verdun Street. Then came the most nerve-wracking part of the mission. The couples began their stroll. Barak, in his dress and wig, walked arm in arm with another commando. The street was not empty. Civilians passed by, glancing at the attractive women. PLO guards stood watch outside the buildings, their rifles slung over their shoulders. Discovery at this point would mean a bloodbath with no hope of escape. But the disguise held. The teams reached their designated buildings undetected, their hearts pounding in the silent night. On a single coordinated radio command, the illusion shattered. Explosive charges blew open the apartment doors simultaneously. Barak's team stormed the home of Kamal Adwan, the PLO's chief of operations. Other teams hit the apartments of Mohammed Youssef al-Najjar and Kamal Nasser. The surprise was total. The three leaders were eliminated within seconds. The explosions and gunfire instantly turned the quiet neighborhood into a war zone. Dozens of PLO guards, alerted by the noise, swarmed the buildings, pouring heavy fire on the Israeli positions. The surgical strike now became a frantic battle for survival. Laying down suppressing fire, the commandos fought their way back down the stairs and into the street. 2 Israeli soldiers were killed in the intense firefight. The Mossad drivers, waiting with engines running, sped through the panicked streets as bullets tore through the cars. They raced back towards the coast, fighting off pursuing PLO vehicles. Reaching the beach, the commandos scrambled back into their zodiacs and pushed out to sea under a hail of gunfire, leaving behind a stunned and decapitated PLO leadership. The raid was a spectacular success, a textbook example of Special Forces' ingenuity and courage that sent shockwaves across the world. It demonstrated Israel's long reach and its unwavering determination to hold its enemies accountable no matter where they hid. For Ehud Barak, the man who walked through Beirut as a woman and left as a warrior, it was a defining moment. It cemented his legend within the Israeli military as a brilliant planner and a commander of immense personal bravery, a master of unconventional warfare. But just 6 months later, he would be ripped from his world of special operations and thrown into the largest, most brutal conventional war Israel had ever faced. In the autumn of 1973, Ehud Barak was a world away from the shadows and whispers of Sayeret Matkal. He was immersed in the academic quiet of Stanford University in the United States, studying for a master's degree in engineering economic systems. The deserts of the Middle East felt distant, a part of a life temporarily paused for intellectual pursuit. That fragile peace was shattered on October 6th. News crackled over radios of a massive, coordinated surprise attack. On Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, the armies of Egypt and Syria had launched a full-scale invasion of Israel. The nation was caught completely off guard, its defenses reeling under the unexpected onslaught. For Barak, there was no hesitation. The academic papers were left on his desk, the life in California abandoned in an instant. His only thought was of home, of a nation fighting for its very survival. He immediately boarded a plane, joining a stream of reservists from around the world, flying back into the storm. When he landed at Lod Airport, he found a country gripped by fear and uncertainty. The initial reports from the fronts were catastrophic. On the Golan Heights, Syrian tanks were pouring through Israeli lines. In the south, the situation was even more dire. The supposedly impregnable Bar-Lev line along the Suez Canal had been breached and overrun. The Egyptian Second and Third Armies had crossed the waterway in overwhelming force, establishing a deep and threatening foothold in the Sinai Peninsula. The Israeli Defense Forces were in a state of managed chaos, scrambling to mobilize and counter the two-front assault. The initial confidence of the military leadership had evaporated, replaced by a grim struggle to hold the line. It was in this crucible of desperation that Barak reported for duty, an elite commando expecting to join the fight in a familiar capacity. But the war had its own plans for him. The Armored Corps had suffered devastating losses in the first days of fighting. Tanks were in short supply, and experienced tank commanders were even rarer. The high command needed leaders, men who could think and act decisively under unimaginable pressure, regardless of their specific military background. In an extraordinary field promotion born of necessity, Lieutenant Colonel Barak, the Special Forces operative, was given a task for which he had no formal training. He was ordered to take command of an armored battalion. This was not a polished, cohesive unit from the standing army. It was an ad hoc formation, a collection of damaged tanks that had been hastily repaired and thrown back into the fight. His crews were a mix of veterans and reservists, many of whom had never served together. Barak, who had spent his career operating in small elite teams on foot, was now responsible for hundreds of men and dozens of tons of steel. The battlefield was his brutal classroom. He had to learn the intricacies of armored warfare on the fly, absorbing the tactics of tank formations, the art of fire and maneuver, and the complex logistics of fuel and ammunition while under constant enemy fire. It was the ultimate test of pure leadership, stripped of all specialization. He pored over manuals between engagements, quizzed his subordinate officers, and relied on his innate tactical genius to adapt to this new, terrifying environment. His authority came not from an armored corps insignia, but from his calm demeanor in the face of chaos and his clear, decisive commands over the radio. He projected an aura of control in a situation that was spiraling into disaster, and his men, desperate for direction, responded to it. His hastily assembled battalion was thrown into the southern front, directly into the path of the Egyptian advance. The objective was to halt the enemy momentum and help create the conditions for a major Israeli counteroffensive. This mission would bring Barak and his men to a desolate patch of desert known as the Chinese Farm. It was not a farm at all, but an abandoned Japanese agricultural research station, a name misunderstood by Israeli intelligence. This place, a confusing maze of irrigation ditches and buildings, would become the scene of one of the most savage and pivotal battles of the entire war. Here, Barak's leadership would be forged in fire and steel. The Battle of the Chinese Farm was a brutal, close-quarters slugging match. It was a chaotic swirl of armor, infantry, and artillery, with units becoming intermingled and command structures breaking down. Egyptian infantry, armed with deadly anti-tank missiles, hunted Israeli armor in the tangled terrain. Barak was not a remote commander directing the battle from a rear headquarters. He led from the front, his head and shoulders exposed in the turret of his command tank, a clear target for every enemy soldier. He was a commando in a tank, using the vehicle as an extension of his own will and courage. He was a constant presence on the radio, his voice cutting through the static and the roar of engines, directing his makeshift unit with a clarity that defied the mayhem around him. He personally led charges against numerically superior Egyptian armored formations, using speed and aggression to disrupt their attacks. When one of his companies was pinned down, Barak maneuvered his own tank to provide covering fire, drawing enemy attention to himself so his men could regroup. He seemed to be everywhere at once, identifying threats, shifting his forces, and urging his crews forward with relentless determination. He was not just commanding, he was fighting. His instincts honed in countless secret raids now applied to the brutal calculus of a conventional war. His improvised battalion, under his direct and fearless leadership, performed beyond all expectation. They fought with a ferocity that helped stall the Egyptian push toward the Israeli heartland. His unit played a critical role in securing the corridor that would allow General Ariel Sharon's division to execute its audacious plan to cross the Suez Canal and encircle the Egyptian Third Army. Barak's men helped create the opening, paying a heavy price in blood and steel to hold the line at its most vulnerable point. It was a masterful display of adaptability and raw courage that did not go unnoticed. Ariel Sharon, a commander not known for handing out praise lightly, was deeply impressed by the performance of the Special Forces officer turned tank commander. He later remarked on Barak's incredible achievement during those desperate days. He said, "He showed what a true commander is, adapting to the battlefield and leading from the front." It was the highest possible praise from one of Israel's most legendary and demanding military figures. Barak had entered the war as a commando and emerged as a proven armored leader. The Yom Kippur War was a national trauma for Israel, a conflict that began in failure and ended in a costly, hard-won victory. For Ehud Barak, it was a personal and professional crucible. He had faced an entirely new form of warfare and had not only survived but had excelled, demonstrating a versatility that was rare even in the elite ranks of the Israeli Defense Forces. His heroism in the Sinai Desert proved that Barak's brilliance was not confined to the shadows of special operations. This performance propelled him toward the very pinnacle of the Israeli military establishment. The crucible of the Yom Kippur War had forged a new generation of commanders, and Ehud Barak emerged from its fires not just as a proven warrior, but as a military intellectual. His rapid ascent through the Israeli Defense Forces high command was no longer a matter of if, but when. He transitioned from the sharp end of the spear to the mind that guided it. As the head of the planning directorate, he was no longer executing missions. He was conceptualizing the very future of the Israeli military. His unique perspective, blending the audacity of special operations with the grim realities of armored warfare, allowed him to see the battlefield in 3 dimensions. He understood both the lone operative deep behind enemy lines and the tank commander facing a wave of anti-tank missiles. This dual fluency made him a formidable strategist, one who could anticipate threats and design doctrines that were both innovative and practical. His journey continued to the nerve center of Israeli security when he was appointed head of Amman, the Military Intelligence Directorate. Here, the man who had disguised himself as a woman to eliminate terrorists in Beirut was now responsible for piecing together the mosaic of regional threats. He brought an operator's skepticism to the world of analysis, demanding intelligence that was not just accurate but actionable. He pushed the organization to think like the enemy, to understand their motivations and anticipate their moves with lethal precision. From Amman, he took command of the Central Command, placing him in direct control of the volatile West Bank. He was now responsible for a sprawling military apparatus, applying the grand strategies he had once helped formulate to the complex daily friction of occupation and counterterrorism. He was shaping the entire Israeli military, instilling in its DNA the lessons learned from both Sayeret Matkal and the Sinai Desert. In 1991, Ehud Barak reached the summit. He was appointed the 14th Chief of the General Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, the highest uniformed position in the nation. The soldier who began his career as a raw paratrooper now held the security of Israel in his hands. The challenges he inherited were immense and multifaceted. The First Intifada was raging, a brutal, low-intensity conflict that pitted soldiers against civilians in a struggle for which there was no conventional military solution. It was a war of stones and Molotov cocktails, of nightly raids and moral compromises, demanding a new kind of leadership that balanced decisive action with profound restraint. Barak navigated these treacherous waters, attempting to quell the violence while understanding that the ultimate solution was not military. He saw the Israeli Defense Forces not as a tool of occupation, but as the nation's ultimate shield. He often said, "The IDF is not just an army, it's the melting pot of the nation and the ultimate guarantor of our existence." Simultaneously, he managed the complex and perilous security situation in southern Lebanon. He oversaw a partial withdrawal of forces, a strategic recalibration aimed at reducing casualties while maintaining a credible deterrent against Hezbollah. This required a delicate touch, combining military pressure with diplomatic foresight. Beyond these immediate fires, Barak was focused on the horizon. He initiated deep structural reforms to prepare the military for the threats of the future. Long-range ballistic missiles, non-state terrorist organizations with global reach, and the ever-present specter of a multi-front conventional war. As Chief of Staff, every decision carried the weight of the nation's survival. He was the final backstop, the commander responsible for ensuring that Israel could defend itself against any enemy at any time. Yet, beyond the strategic appointments and the immense responsibilities, another legacy was being cemented, one forged in the heat of countless operations. Ehud Barak became and remains the most decorated soldier in the history of the Israeli Defense Forces. This distinction was not won in the halls of the General Staff. but in the dark alleys and hostile airfields where he had risked his life time and again. His record is unmatched, the Medal of Distinguished Service, one of the nation's highest awards for courage, and an astonishing 4 Chief of Staff citations. Each citation, a Tzalash Matkal, is a rare honor, awarded for an act of supreme bravery and operational genius that directly influenced the outcome of a critical mission. These were not medals for exemplary administration. They were for leading the rescue of a hijacked Sabena airliner at Lod Airport. They were for storming a terrorist headquarters in Beirut. They were for covert operations deep in enemy territory, missions whose full details remain classified to this day. He embodied the ethos of the elite units he helped build. The legendary commander Moshe Dayan once said of Sayeret Matkal, "They carry the whole nation on their shoulders." Barak never shed that weight. He carried it with him from the rank of lieutenant to chief of staff. The decorations were never the goal, they were the inevitable byproduct of a relentless personal code. He believed a commander must lead from the front, that he should never ask his soldiers to face a danger he would not face himself. His collection of medals was simply the physical evidence of a career spent consistently choosing the most difficult, the most dangerous, and the most critical path. After 35 years of service, having reached the highest possible rank and achieved legendary status, Ehud Barak left the military. But his story was far from over, and his legacy would be defined not just by the battles he won, but by the enduring image of the warrior he embodied. The man who emerged from the smoke of countless battles was far more complex than the steely commander seen on grainy newsreels. Beneath the uniform and the hardened exterior was a figure of profound duality, a man who navigated the worlds of violence and intellect with equal mastery. While his comrades knew him as a cold, calculating leader who could make life or death decisions in a heartbeat, others knew a different Ehud Barak. This was the man who found solace not in the roar of a tank engine, but in the intricate fugues of Johann Sebastian Bach, which he played with considerable skill on his piano. The same hands that had disguised him as a woman to eliminate terrorists in Beirut could also coax profound beauty from ivory keys, revealing a deep inner world that few were ever allowed to see. This intellectual depth was not merely a hobby, it was the foundation of his being. Barak was a true scholar, a bibliophile who amassed a personal library of thousands of books on every conceivable subject. His formal education was a testament to his voracious curiosity and analytical mind. He earned a bachelor's degree in physics and mathematics from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, not as a young student, but as a seasoned and decorated military officer. He later traveled to the United States, attending Stanford University, to complete a master's degree in engineering economic systems. This fusion of the abstract and the practical, the warrior and the physicist, defined him. He was the embodiment of a uniquely Israeli archetype, the warrior scholar, a leader whose strategic brilliance was forged in the crucible of both academic rigor and battlefield experience. His intellectual prowess directly shaped his lasting impact on the Israeli Defense Forces and Special Operations doctrine worldwide. Barak did not simply command Sayeret Matkal, he fundamentally remade it in his own image. He took the raw courage and improvisation that defined the unit's early days and fused it with meticulous, almost scientific planning. Under his leadership, the concept of the surgical, intelligence-led raid was perfected. He understood that information was the most powerful weapon. Missions were no longer just about force. They were about precision, speed, and surprise, all built upon a foundation of painstakingly gathered intelligence. He drilled his men relentlessly, ensuring that every operator knew not only his own role, but the entire operational picture. This philosophy transformed hostage rescue and counterterrorism. The success of operations like Sabena Flight 571 was not accidental. It was the result of a doctrine that Barak championed, that a small, highly intelligent, and audacious unit could achieve strategic goals that were impossible for larger, conventional forces. He established the principle that intellectual superiority could overcome numerical inferiority. The tactics he honed, from intricate rehearsals to psychological deception, became the gold standard for Sayeret Matkal. This model of a thinking man's special forces unit was so effective that it was studied and emulated by elite counterterrorism teams across the globe, from the United States to Europe. His legacy is written in the operational manuals of the world's best soldiers. Ultimately, Ehud Barak's career is the story of a Sabra, a native-born Israeli who dedicated his entire life to the survival of the state. He was a product of the kibbutz, raised with the pioneers' ethos of building the land, yet destined to become one of its most formidable defenders. His journey from the battlefields of the Six-Day War to the highest echelons of command was a continuous act of service. Even his later entry into politics, which saw him become Prime Minister of Israel, can be viewed as an extension of this lifelong commitment, another front in the ongoing struggle to secure his nation's future. But his core identity was always that of a soldier, the man who stood on the line when everything was at stake. His willingness to repeatedly place himself in mortal danger was not born of recklessness, but of a foundational belief in the Zionist project. For Barak, the existence of a strong, independent Jewish state was a historical necessity that demanded any sacrifice. He was the living embodiment of the nation's reliance on the courage, creativity, and intellectual firepower of its children. He never asked his soldiers to take a risk he had not already taken himself, a principle that earned him their unwavering loyalty. His life is a metaphor for Israel's own journey, a nation born from peaceful, idealistic dreams that was forced by the harsh realities of its neighborhood to become a warrior of unparalleled skill and resolve. He remains an icon of that transformation. From the fertile soil of a kibbutz to the sterile corridors of power, Ehud Barak's life was a testament to the Israeli imperative: to be both a builder and a fighter, a scholar and a soldier. He was the lightning his chosen name promised, a force of brilliant, decisive action that illuminated Israel's path through its darkest hours. He led from the front, whether in the fuselage of a hijacked plane, on the streets of an enemy capital, or in the turret of a tank, never asking his men to face a danger he would not face himself. His military career was not just a collection of medals and daring raids, it was a 35-year vigil over the security of his nation. He gave his youth, his intellect, and his courage to the Israeli Defense Forces, shaping its most elite units and leading the entire military with an unyielding demand for excellence. The operations he commanded saved countless lives and eliminated existential threats, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's history. The story of Ehud Barak is more than the biography of a single soldier, no matter how decorated. It is the story of a generation that was asked to bear an impossible burden, and did so with genius, audacity, and an unwavering love for their homeland. He remains a symbol of the complex, brilliant, and formidable Israeli warrior, a guardian whose legacy is etched into the very survival of the state he so fiercely protected.